Hello all. Today we're going to talk about pitching, how to pitch so that they believe you. I'm going to start with introducing myself. My name's Łukasz Hacura. I started in the industry as a programmer and ended up co-founding Anshar Studios. And for the last 8 years, I'm running the studio. And today I want to share our experiences in pitching, because Anshar is a company that does mostly work for hire. Most of the money that comes into the company comes from external sources, like, for example, publishers to whom we either pitch our ideas or we're giving a certain context, business context of a IP that they would like to develop, and then we counter pitch how would we approach doing this job for them, and that's how we operate. So I wanna share our experiences in what makes a good pitch, specifically in the game industry, and even more specifically when you're talking to a game publisher. Okay, so let's start with something fairly simple. What is actually the purpose of a pitch, right? It seems straightforward. You wish to convince somebody that the idea that you have is a good idea. But that's only half of the pitch, because the other half of the pitch is to convince somebody that you can pull it off. So having a good idea is one thing, but if the recipient does not believe that you can make that idea happen, that will also be not a successful pitch, right? And by a initial successful pitch basically means funding, right? So I'm not talking about always be pitching in terms of creative direction, but in terms of this initial pitch, when you want to convince somebody to give you money, they need to believe that you can pull off the idea. So for me, the structure of a good pitch is based on 3 pillars, and I choose 3 books that encapsulate those pillars quite well. And so those pillars are why, how, and what, right? So we need to know why we're pitching something. We need to pitch it really well. I mean, how are we gonna pitch a certain idea? And we need to have a what, right? We need to have the idea itself. So Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why, which explains at length why a reason behind something is more important than the idea itself. So if you really wanna touch somebody, if you really wanna convince somebody that this is important, that this makes sense, that this is a really good idea, you don't need to explain the idea, you need to explain why you want to do it. There's a part of the book that explains that everybody knows what they're doing, right? We know, hey, we're doing RPGs, we're doing platformer games, we're doing free-to-play mobile games. Everybody knows what their product is, everybody knows what their game is. Some people don't even know how to do the things that they're doing, but not many people really have a deep thought about why they're doing certain things, right? So they're just following either some kind of a trend, or there was a certain circumstance that pushed them in that direction, but it's not often that it's really clarified why we're doing a certain game. And that's a very important part of the pitch. I call this authenticity. I mean, if we really lay down why we want to do this, not this title, and it's going to be the truth, and there's going to be a good motivation behind it, not like, hey, we want to do, for example, we want to do battle royale games. Why? Because battle royale games are popular right now. That's a very, very shitty reason to do a game. I mean, it's not the worst part of the reason if a genre is popular and we think that we can contribute into that genre. We think that we can add something to it. We have an idea that's gonna tip the scales a bit, then that's a very good reason to do it, right? But if the reason, the sole reason is the genre is popular, so we're going into that genre, then that's not a very good pitch, right? So authenticity and reasoning behind why you want to pitch some game is very important. Another one is how. So there's this awesome book, Save the Cat, which is about screenwriting. It's a very cynical book, actually, because it says that there is only a certain way that you can do a Hollywood script and actually be successful in Hollywood. But that's not what we're talking here about. What we're talking about is the first chapter of the book, which is this best piece of advice on pitching that I have ever read. So I also encourage you all to read the book. But yeah, Blake Snyder explains it in a way that a good film pitch for him consists of four things: a hook, a mental image, cost and target audience, and a killer title. Now, what that really means is when you have a hook, it's basically hey, there is a random cop stranded in a building with terrorists, right? And the only thing he wants to do is to fix things up with his wife, but the terrorists take over a building, right? So there's a hook, there's a mental image, there's a cost and target audience to it, because you already know that you're probably going to shoot in a single location. You know that this is going to be an action movie, right? Because you have a cop, you have terrorists, etc. And the only thing you need to add to it is a killer title, Die Hard, for example. Right. So, and there are many other examples in the book, and he explains his reasoning why. But I try to translate this because this is a really good way to pitch a movie. So, if you would translate that into a video game, I would say that you need to have a USP, right? It can't be just a genre. It can't be just an idea that I want to do a fantasy fighting game, or I want to do a free-to-play mobile clicker game. I mean, that's not enough. You need to have something. What's the USP? What's the one thing that this game is about? Another thing that does not translate to every game, because there are games who do not have a clear player fantasy, but being that my current background is PC and console premium games, most of the games have some kind of player fantasy. So who am I in the game and why is it cool, right? So that's a very important question. Who am I, what I'm doing, and why is it cool? So what's the player fantasy? What's this mental image when I'm thinking about what I'm going to do in that game? What do I see in my head? Our industry is very, on the one hand, it's very strict on what types of genres we have. We have no problem mixing genres. So we say that this game is a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of that. But usually you can put it spot on a game. So saying the genre automatically defines your target audience a bit. It says what type of sales channel you're going to use. It defines what platform is going to be best, and also defines the budget, because in your mind, you already know, okay, that there's a difference between creating even a really good match-free game versus a big RPG or an open world action adventure game, right? So a genre also is an important part of the pitch. And I personally believe that the title in this pitching phase, when you're trying to find funding, especially with publishers, that title has zero bearing on the outcome. And to be honest, most projects that I worked on, there's like over 20 of them, had much different titles when they launched and when they started. So usually we use code names or some kind of, or even use other IPs as this player fantasy. For example, I was part of the game, Anshar Studios created the game Detached. And for a long time, the code name for the game was Gravity, which is the title of the movie that the game was inspired from, right? So I don't think that the title is super important, but some kind of mental image supported by the art, be it a reference board, or if you can afford it, if you can do it already at the pitching phase, promo art speaks volumes about what the game is about. And finally, you go into what. And to be honest, the Art of Game Design by Jesse Schell is obviously an awesome book, but any book on game design that mentions some kind of restrictions, some kind of, like, for example, design pillars or idea boxes would be fine as an example here. So I won't focus on the design per se, but I would say that you already need those design pillars defined at the pitch phase, because you want to pitch a consistent creative vision. It's not to say that this can't change, because game pillars also iterate throughout the pre-production, right? They can change, but knowing what you want, having a consistent creative vision is a strong part of the pitch. So when you have this authenticity, this reasoning behind why you want to do it, you have a great way of saying it. You have the log line, those couple of sentences that you can immediately pitch the game, and you have a strong idea, you have a strong vision for the game, then that's your pitch. That's basically all you need. So let's do a couple of examples that are really good in the industry. So This War of Mine, the log line of This War of Mine is: in war, not everyone is a soldier. And if we combine it with the promo art that I just showed you, that's already a very strong pitch. I don't want to spend too much time because you could pitch more, obviously, but just this promo art and this one sentence, in war, not everyone is a soldier, that's already a very strong pitch, right? You already have a sense of emotions, who you are in that. I mean, that you are not a soldier, that you're a civilian. You got the theme. There are a couple of things missing in the pitch in terms of, like, genre, for example, and actual, what we're going to be doing in this game. But that's something that you could expand upon, right? But if you start with this, that's already a great pitch. Similar great pitch is Super Hot. Time moves only when you move, right? And you have this GIF, for example, of that that it's a first-person shooter. That's already a very strong pitch, very strong mental image, player fantasy, etc. And you did not even mention any type of lore here or backstory, right? It's just, why is it cool? Now you have. I wanted to also give some counterexamples, and Wasteland 2 pitch, not game, is a very good example of a bad pitch. Wasteland 2 was a very successful game. Director's Cuts of Wastelands 2 is a very good RPG. So that also shows that you can have a really good idea and you can have a really good game, and you can still do a shitty pitch. So this pitch was made, I think, back in 2012. So it's like 8 years ago, but you can still Google it and Google Wasteland 2 Kickstarter video, where Brian Fargo basically says that he wants to do an isometric RPG. And in short, because I don't want to dwell on it, that was the pitch. I want to do an isometric RPG. It was a successful pitch because it was a starting booming time for Kickstarter. Brian Fargo has tons of credibility. He has an amazing portfolio of amazing RPGs. So he pulled it off. But basically his pitch was, I want to do a post-apocalyptic isometric RPG, which I don't encourage anybody without his name and his credibility to actually do as a pitch, right? You need to have more. You need to show something. You need to create that mental image. You need to have the USP, etc. Saying just the genre is not enough. And actually, a couple of years later, 2016, also a legend, John Romero, he pitched Black Room, also on Kickstarter. And there was a bit of lore there. You can also find this if you Black Room Kickstarter video. If you Google it, you're going to get the video. We don't have time right now to get into analysis of that. But basically, you have some some concepts of why we're doing things in terms of backstory and lore, which usually is the least interesting part of a pitch. We know almost nothing about the mechanics. We only have the credibility of Romero as a legend in the visceral first-person shooters, which was great, but it was already 2016. The Kickstarter bubble has begun to shrink in terms of game dev, and the Kickstarter was a fail. So those two are pretty good bad examples of how not to pitch, especially if you don't have this level of credibility, right? Because those guys are legends in game dev. And I wanted to do also like a double example. So let's say Papers, Please, right? It's an immensely successful game. Made by Lucas Pope. So we already know that the idea is good, but let's try to pitch it. So let's say that Papers, Please is a video game about the fact that you're an immigration officer and there is a certain set of rules. So people come in and you do things like check if the date is correct, you search them, you check their papers, you check their visas, you have this special book of rules, and those rules then with more time passing by are going to get more complex, and there are going to be a series of mini games that are going to that you're going to play to determine if somebody can enter the country or not. And based on your efficiency, you're going to get money, and you can spend this money on, for example, medicine, food, or clothing for your family. So that's the pitch, right? So that's a terrible pitch. I hope you caught up into that. That's like a horrible pitch of Papers, Please. So you can have a really good game, and you can still do a very, very bad pitch. Let's try this again. Okay, and I haven't practiced this like 100 times, and you should practice your pitch 100 times. So I'm sure that you can pitch Papers, Please much better than I'm just going to do it. But Papers, Please is a dystopian document thriller where you're an immigration officer, but you're an immigration officer in this dystopian, totalitarian communism country that throws at you the stupid rules, ever-changing, stupid bureaucratic rules about who can and cannot enter into the country, who are clearly unfair. And you hear those personal stories of immigrants trying to enter your country, and you need to decide if you're gonna go by the book of law that's constantly changing, or you're gonna, be a human being, and how much of the humanity are you gonna lose? Because actually, if you don't have money, you cannot support your family. So there's a big dilemma. You walk the line between, being human and trying to survive, which basically perfectly sets up what a corrupted system can do to money. So when you're in the concept phase and you have only a pitch document, your credibility is very important to actually get the money. You can lower the risk factor by including stuff like ripomatics, so trailers that are montage from other movies or video games that just showcase the emotions you wanna have if you're in your video game. If you have a little bit more time and money and skill, you can do a target render. So that's usually how Ubisoft internally pitches their. You can search, for example, for target renders on almost every Ubisoft game, and this is something that they do at the beginning of the production to showcase, hey, this is what we wanted the game to be about. There are certain genres that you don't even need to have a trailer or a target render. You can make a paper prototype, so even without programmers, without any technical skill, you can still pull off the showcasing what you're going for with a certain game. Then when you're in a pre-production phase, so basically you're doing a prototype or maybe a vertical slice, that's the most common place to be seeking funding when you're doing when you have a prototype, and preferably vertical slice. So by vertical slice, we mean that it's ideally it would be a slice of a game with final art, music, sound design, etc., that can showcase that you can actually deliver upon the quality that you're trying to pitch. That's the most common place to be when you're pitching a game to a publisher. But you can, if you have the funding and you just want, some last stretch help with localization, with QA, with marketing, PR, and publishing itself, contact to first-party platform holders, etc. Obviously, you can also pitch then. Then the build is much more important actually than the pitch is still important, and having that logline, etc. So for a person to be wanting to click on that build, that's also important, but the build needs to speak for itself. So at that stage, if you already have a game, then this is the most important thing. Okay, so let's talk about the pitch document structure, because that's the most common document in that pitching phase that you're gonna have iterated and sent back and forth to a publisher with remarks, etc. So I like to start pitch documents with a summary. So I always imagine that my pitch is going to go on a desk on a very bored and very tired executive, and he or she's gonna read only the first page. That's it. So a summary. Then you go to actually describe your game. So what are your systems and core loops? Some story and lore, but short. Story and lore cannot be like this 16-page document on, what happened 2,000 years before the game started. That's one of the most common mistakes I see in pitches. And the most common response to that is, yes, but our game is an RPG, or our game is a narrative-driven, I don't know, thriller. How can we not discuss story and lore when pitching? Where you actually can. So I just pitched you Die Hard, and there was one sentence of story there, right? So you can pitch almost every movie, and you can pitch almost every game with having one or two sentences about the story and lore. So keep it short. In our industry, it's very important to build that mental image with some kind of references, preferably maybe already concept art or a promo art if you can afford it at this stage, but you can always do a reference board. So a mashup of different art pieces, movies, comic books, video games, whatever you need, just to showcase that, hey, this is the vibe that we're going for in terms of art. And another summary in terms of current status. So we're in a prototyping phase, we're seeking funding for production. This is our current build, this is our team, this is us. Those are our next proposed steps. So this is how I usually end a pitch. But that's just a loose structure that I modify depending on a situation or how far we are, because sometimes the publisher wants more information and we iterate on a pitch. And what I did actually for this presentation is I went back to our last pitch that we actually did to a major publisher. Obviously, it's under NDA, so I needed to erase everything. But I left the structure for you to see. So that was actually a second pitch. So we sent a one-pager first because that was the request, and then we got to like stage 2 of pitching, and the publisher required much more information. So this is the structure that we went for. So we start obviously with a front page. This is the place also where like a snippet of your promo art or your game logo or whatever you have goes in, if you have it. If not, that's also fine. I start the first page with the overview, with the summary. I use the word overview here, not the summary. And I start with the elevator pitch. So the elevator pitch, so the log line, basically, couple of sentences with the save the cat mentality in it. Then I moved to core game pillars, and that was my first page. What I usually also put here is codename of the game, platforms, price, genre, etc. I also usually put it on the first page, but actually this publisher requested metrics and data paragraph, so I moved it there per to their request. Then we used a paragraph called main idea, where that's basically an elevator pitch, but going more in depth about what are you going to do as a player in the game. Then a list of key features, list of core gameplay loops, gameplay summary. You see that the font is screwed up there, sorry. Gameplay summary, so how the key features connect with core gameplay loops. Story summary, very short paragraph. Again, that's a short paragraph. Art direction, actually, because it was a second pitch, it was a couple of reference boards, so it was quite a big segment here. Company overview, where we are as a company, budget and staffing plan, so how we're planning to do this game. Metrics and data, which I mentioned at first. So, what is our predicted Metacritic? What is our predicted, what is our target price? What is our genre, etc. And previous experience. Now that's a really extensive pitch. It was like, I think it ended up being like a 16-page pitch. So that's a big document, right? That's not a game design doc by far, but that's a pretty big pitch document. You can do a really good pitch document with like 2 pages, and that's also fine. Like, you have the overview, you have the key features and core gameplay loops, art direction with a couple of screenshots. So okay, so maybe 2 pages is really hard, maybe 3 pages if you're gonna add a reference board, right? So every publisher is different, and you shouldn't be afraid to diverge from what you know, from what you use as a template. A template is just a starting point, but that's what that's from our actual last pitch, and that's our, let's say, template of what is our start when we pitch a game. Okay, what comes after we got it, right? Let's say that we prepared, we trained our pitch, we created our documents, we know what our game about, we have our design pillars, we have everything prepared, and now we want to pitch it. So a couple of things that you want to remember when you're pitching it. First of all, know who you're pitching to, because you're going to pitch the game differently, for example, to a publisher that specializes in a certain genre. So, for example, putting sales estimates, what do you estimate you're going to sell, and pitching those data points, this research that you have done, to a publisher that is an expert in that field, is tricky, is risky. I wouldn't do that necessarily. I mean, because if you know how big your game is, what the genre of the game is, and what the game length is, what the game complexity is, you can explain the game, you know what your productions value are going to be, then to be honest, it's not your job at this point to predict accurately sales, because if you're targeting it to a publisher that is an expert in that particular genre, they should know what they're looking at, right? So actually sales estimate for a specialized publisher is usually sorry, I'm laughing at the question. I'm gonna answer the questions later, but yeah, there are no links to good pitches of This War of Mine, Superhot, in terms of extensive ones. There's their whole marketing campaign. For Superhot, I would go with their Kickstarter page. This War of Mine was self-funded, so I don't think that they ever published those good pitches. Okay, but going back to know who you're pitching to. So when you're pitching to a more general publisher, or you're pitching to an investor, not to a publisher, especially when you're pitching not to a game publisher but to an investor. For example, sales data are important, right? Or estimates on the sales data. So long story short, you should come into a meeting or into a call or whatever prepared in terms of, you know, that who you're going to know who's at the other side of the table, who you're pitching to. Know how are you going to pitch? And by that, I mean, you're going to prepare differently for a 30-second elevator pitch. You're going to prepare differently for a 15-minute presentation. You're going to prepare differently when you're in a noisy restaurant and you're only going to have your phone and you're going to eat dinner with a potential publisher for 45 minutes, right? So depending on what's the context, what's the situation, is it on an event, are they visiting you, are you visiting them, etc. You should adjust the way you're pitching, right? And you should practice it. You should practice your pitch. The pitch I did for Papers, Please, I practiced yesterday 2 times, right? That's not enough. If I practiced it a couple more times, over extent of a couple days, if I received feedback from my peers, from friends, from other industry peers, then that pitch would improve. It would be much, much better. So practicing your pitch is also very important. And make it easier for the recipient, meaning that afterwards, after you deliver this amazing pitch, there is this set of questions that is so common that you can make it really easier on the recipient to make next steps, right? Because, for example, let's say that you're doing a presentation. So the form of the pitch, you're going to a publisher, you're going on site, or they're visiting you, doesn't matter, but it's a 15-minute presentation. And you have a 15-minute PowerPoint slides that show, hey, this is the game that we want to make. And at the end of the day, somebody says, hey, this is great. Can you send it over to me? And you say, well, yes, I need to convert it into a PDF, make some changes, etc. But at the end of the day, yes, I'm going to send it to you in a week, right? You can have that document ready in less than 24 hours. And actually, the best thing is make it before the meeting, right? Have that PDF pitch document to be sent over the email, because usually, not always, but usually the person you're pitching to isn't the person who's making the call, right? You're pitching, for example, to some kind of a business developer or maybe some head of production or somebody. You're usually not speaking to the CEO. You're usually not speaking to people who are actually deciding on the money side, right? Or maybe it's a very advanced culturally company that does some kind of a vote and there's a committee of people that decide. You have your champion, etc. So if you have this champion at the company who's going to pitch to 20 people, you better have materials for that person, for him also to be able to pitch, right? So that's really important, to make it easy and have all those things prepared so that somebody else can also try and pitch your game inside the publisher, right? Okay, in the talk description, I also promised to say a couple of words about what it's like to pitching to publishers in 2020, what actual deals are out there, what is possible to negotiate. Keep in mind that the biggest thing I can say is it depends. So just treat this with a grain of salt, in the sense of this is the context space in which you can move around when negotiating a deal. Okay, so so what are the real percentages? That's the most common questions that I get. Okay, so if I have a game, what is the rev share deal, right? And again, it really depends, because the question is, okay, who gets the AP afterwards? When you're done with the game, does the AP stay with you, or does the AP stay with the publisher? And by the way, I'm not the one who's saying that you should always fight like crazy for the AP. I mean, sometimes you should, and sometimes you don't need to. Again, it depends. It depends on the situation, it depends on the strength of the AP, it depends on the probability of doing a sequel. It it depends on so many things that I could not say with all confidence that it's always the best course to fight to keep the IP. Because I know about deals that people fought like crazy to retain the IP, which meant that they lost almost all revenue share just to get that into the deal. And at the end of the day, turned out to be a mistake, right? So it really depends. But it is something that's part of this. Okay, so what are the real percentages? The question is also, how much money have you invested prior, right? Is it a type of a full funding deal where all the development costs are covered by the publisher? Or is it the type of a deal where actually you covered all the development costs, and what you're asking right now on the signature of a publishing deal is a minimum guarantee? Like, for example, okay, we have spent €1 million on this game, but we're not going to sign without, let's say, 50,000 euro minimal guarantee paid in this type of tranches, etc., etc. Apart from the marketing budget, apart from the from any other costs that are to be bared, and that also changes the revenue share, right? Because you're going to have almost a reverse revenue split when you request full funding versus we just want a publishing and distribution deal. We don't need any money. We don't need a minimal guarantee. Those are drastically different deals. And also the question is, are you getting a revenue share or are you getting a revenue share? I mean, what I mean by that is from what, right? Because what is recoupable? That's the biggest question. This is one of the most, let's say, tricky parts to negotiate. Because, for example, if a marketing budget is recoupable on the side of the publisher, the question is, okay, how are you gonna control the spendings? Do you have a final say of what is recoupable or not? Is it a fixed budget at first? Do you think that they're going to spend this money efficiently or not? Do you trust those people, or how did the previous campaigns have gone in the publishing wise, right? Are they more streamers oriented or more ads oriented, or they're doing everything across the board? So are they relying on their first party contacts, etc.? Because every publisher have their strengths and weaknesses, right? So it's very important to also define what is recoupable based on that. And for example, one of the biggest mistakes I've seen in indie, especially indie developer signing, is that, for example, they wanted a minimal guarantee, let's say a game for €1 million, right? And that's a common thing that I personally think you should never sign. Is, okay, the budget of the game is €1 million, so you know that you have an awesome game and you have €1 million minimum guarantee. And afterwards, after that's recouped, we're split the rev share. So what is sometimes pushed in the publishing agreement is recoup from your revenue share, meaning that if, for example, revenue share is, let's say, for the sake of argument, it's 50-50, and you have €1 million minimum guarantee. So there are sometimes deals where you get, it's recoupable, this €1 million, but from your revenue share, which means that you're going to get your 50% of revenue after your 50% earns €1 million. So basically after €2 million are going to be recouped, right? I personally think it's a very unfair deal. Obviously, it depends on much more different things, but basically, this is, for example, something that that you should avoid, and I encourage you to look for it in the agreement and say, okay, revenue share is revenue share, right? So if €1 million minimum guarantee is recoupable and we have a 50-50 rev share, that means after the game earns €1 million, we're going to have a 50-50 rev share, right? That's a fair deal. So so what is recoupable also is a very important part of that discussion, right? Where does the money come from? That's also important, because you are going to negotiate differently with a first-party platform holder that is looking to fill out a slot in a certain genre, for example, for a certain streaming service or subscription service, and you know that they need that, and you know that it's not, and you know that they have a certain brackets that they can pay. It's more or less non-negotiable, right? Versus you have something really unique that somebody needs, versus it's an investment market, and actually it's not private money, but somebody wants you to be wants to use that title as a part of an IPO. Depending on where the money comes from, there's a different strength to leveraging your position. And what is your credibility? I think that that's one of the most important facts. I mean, what have you done before? What were your sales before? What were your Metacritic? There's this very sinister saying in the publishing world that you're as good as your last game, which is actually quite scary. But it's a very important part of negotiating a deal. So what is your credibility? Okay, so what are the real percentages? They're all over the place, because depending on what I just said, it can be as far as 10-90, where 10% goes to you and 90% goes to publisher after all recoups, and it can be 90-10 when it's a straight distribution deal where 90% of revenue goes to you and 10% goes to the publisher, but they're recouping the logistic costs for the retail distribution, for example, right? So it can be all over the place, because all the things that I'm mentioning above are very, very important part of that. So so there is no golden standard. And if somebody says there's a golden standard, it's probably a golden standard by their standard, how they're dealing with each and every of those points that I just mentioned. Okay. So to summarize, what makes a good pitch is you need to know why you want to make that particular game. You need to pitch it really well. You need to train your pitch. You need to have a log line, and you need to know exactly what you're pitching. So you need to have a clear-cut vision of the game you want to create. Now, there are some things that I think you should either watch or read. So I don't necessarily say that Start With Why is an amazing book, because it really drags on with the same message. But this TED Talk, I think it's like 80 minutes or something, by Simon Sinek, Start With Why, encapsulates exactly why is important. So I really encourage you to watch that. I really encourage you to read the first chapter if you're interested in screenwriting, the whole book, but the first chapter is one of the best pieces of written words about pitching that I've read. And also a very similar talk to this one, but less focused on publishing and more on pitching to the team, making a creative vision and maintaining that creative vision throughout the development, by Jason Vandenberg about For Honor. It's a very, very, very good talk about pitching from 2017 GDC. It's free online to watch, and I also encourage you to watch this one because it's a really good speech. If you want to reach out to me, that's my Twitter, Łukasz Hacura. I'm at your disposal. Thank you very much for listening to my speech, and we have 9 minutes 40 seconds for questions. So if there are any, like I said before, for Superhot, I would definitely watch their Kickstarter page and their Kickstarter movie. Those GIFs encapsulate the idea very well in terms of Superhot. For This War of Mine, I don't think that there's a lot of materials publicly available apart from their marketing campaign, because it was a internal project, self-funded, right? So so it's harder for those. Okay, seems that we don't have any questions. So again, if you wanna reach out to me with any questions, please reach out on Twitter, Łukasz Hacura. Thank you very much for joining in, and have a great Saturday and the rest of the event. Thank you.